Hello, welcome everybody. I have 11:59 on my end, so 1 minute. Maybe I'll let you guys go 1 minute early. Welcome. As you're coming in, please say hello in the chat. Let us know who you are, where you're coming from, and I will start getting my slide deck ready for you all. So welcome. I have my colleague Gina is going to be helping me not this morning, this afternoon. Um, she's going to be monitoring the chat for me. So as you're coming in, welcome. I want to welcome everybody. I want to thank you all for coming, for taking some time out of your schedule, and coming and spending an hour with me so that we can talk about strengthening the 5 protective factors through grief. For those of you that are just coming in, please type your name into the chat. Let us know who you are and where you're coming from. I always love to read where everybody is coming from. And I'm going to open this too. Hi, Debbie. Hi, Karen. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. Hi, Teresa. Even seeing your name just makes me smile. That's an old coworker of mine. Hello, everybody. Welcome. Welcome to our webinar today. We have 1 more minute before I start going into my slide deck. On your screens right now, you will see myself and you will see Gina and you will see hopefully my slide deck. Gina is my technical helper today. She is going to monitor the chat for me. There's going to be some interactive portions this morning that I'm going to ask you guys to type into the chat, and Gina has so graciously offered to help me with that. So
Hello, Sue. I see Sue is on, and Lorena from Los Angeles. I am a former and a native Angelino, so welcome.
oh, I love that.
Oh, Child Life Team.
Oh, I love the child
Yay.
life team.
Oh, I wonder if you know my former coworker, Jen Bosch. She's a heart transplant
Oh, wow.
social worker there.
All right, so we are at 12 p.m., guys. So I'm going to start. Please continue writing into the chat. Gina's going to monitor that for me. I want to welcome you all. I want to thank you all for the work that you do supporting children, supporting families, and supporting the community. For those of you who are new, uh, we are from Good Grief. My name is Annette Mendez, and Good Grief, we are a nonprofit organization that has been around in New Jersey since the early 2000s. And our mission really is to build resilience in children, strengthen families, and empower communities to grow from loss and adversity. Our work has really been growing in recent years. And so through education and through advocacy, we're able to provide training, curriculum, resources to schools, to hospitals, healthcare, corporations, really any space where we find that we can empower professionals, where we can empower parents and the broader community to support the needs of children and families who are facing loss and adversity. So we have two beautiful homes in New Jersey, right? We have one in Morristown, that's off of Elm Street. Well, it's actually on Elm Street, 38 Elm Street, and another one in Princeton, New Jersey on Mapleton Avenue. And in these two beautiful homes is where we provide free and unlimited. I always like to pause there because people are always like, wait, what, free? Yes, free and unlimited peer support programs to grieving children starting at age 3, all the way through young adult. We are grant and donor funded, so families never get a bill. They don't have to fill out a referral form to come and take part in our peer support programs. Just give us a call, speak to someone from our amazing programming department, and they'll tell you everything that you need to know about our nights of support and really see if this is the type of support that works for you and your family. I encourage you all to visit our website. I will give you my email at the end. And, we're a small but mighty organization. So if you email me and you want to know something about Nights of Support, I promise you I will get it to the person that it needs to get to. And I guarantee you that they will reach out to you and we'll do that warm handoff that way. So now that we've talked about, who Good Grief is and where our homes are located, we're going to shift a little bit from where support happens to how we strengthen that support, okay? And what I want you to do first is really just think about yourself today. I don't want to add anything else on your plate. Really, this webinar is just practical ways that we can help you. My focus this afternoon is strengthening the 5 protective factors through grief. We know that grief is already present in the lives of families and in the communities that we serve, right? And when we understand how grief impacts that resilience, how grief impacts relationships and behaviors, then we can use those 5 protective factors more intentionally. It's a good way to support stability, connection, and healing, right? But before we begin, I want to make sure that you all understand that I want to create a very supportive space for you all, right? So this session is very trauma informed. So what does that mean? That means that your participation is always optional. That means that you are the expert on your experience. And I really want to prioritize your safety. I want to prioritize choice and really a lot of compassion. So really, I want you to do what you need to do to keep yourself safe. If that means, stepping away, that's fine. This is recorded. You're going to get a copy of the recording. If that means, I really can't get through this, that's fine. Again, you'll get a copy of the recording. I just want you to really think about you and think about what makes you feel comfortable and what makes you feel safe, okay? So with that being said, I have a chat prompt for you guys. In one word, I really want you to think about what really helps people feel supported during really difficult times. Think about that for a second. In one word, I want you to tell me what helps people feel supported during difficult times. There's no right or wrong answers here. This is just a way for us to take notice.
Community, being there, being heard, connection, listening, compassion, inclusion, presence, friends, active listening, presence, empathy, social support, presence, showing up.
Showing up. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. I really want us to really have these values anchor us and guide us for the rest of the afternoon that we're going to have together, okay? Because a lot of what I'm hearing Gina mention that you're putting into the chat are parts of the 5 protective factors. So let's first take a look at how we're going to spend I keep saying morning, our afternoon together, right? So we're going to really focus on how grief impacts family functioning and how protective factors help families stabilize and heal, right? So we're going to start with why strengthening the 5 protective factors matters, right? Why does this webinar even matter? Well, I'm going to tell you why. Grief really affects an entire family system, right? After a loss, we oftentimes see changes in behavior. We see increased stress responses. We see a lot of reduced coping capacities and a lot of disruptions within the relationships in the families, right? So when we're talking about caregivers, right? When caregivers are overwhelmed, the people that they care for are experiencing a lot less stability, right? So let me just give you a few examples, right? So if we're talking about in schools, right, a grieving student may show some behavioral changes, right? Because a caregiver at home is struggling. So they might get to school late, right? They might get to school and be hungry. They might get to school and be exhausted because they didn't get to bed the night before, right? Because everything has been uprooted and everything has been changed, right? What does that look like in a community? So families might start disengaging from services that they used to go to religiously, right? Or they might disengage from services that require them to be there, right? Because they just can't. Just the thought of, getting up feels incredibly overwhelming. Just the thought of having to do something else is just incredibly overwhelming, right? So, excuse me, we have to approach families with curiosity, right? And with compassion, right? We have to see from them, right? We have to look to them to see what support it is that they need. We're not going to assume, we're not going to check the boxes that we have at our own agencies, but rather we're going to try to figure out what support is needed and what is this family saying that they need, right? Because when we strengthen caregivers, we really are strengthening families and communities, right? And then we have this beautiful ripple effect, right? Through this support and through these resources. And like we saw earlier in the webinar, this community, this connection that you all were saying that really helps when we're going through something difficult. We also know that grief affects multiple areas of functioning, right? And one really helpful framework for understanding support are the five protective factors, right? I'm going to say this a few times during this webinar. I want to remind all of us that our role is never to fix grief, right? There's nothing wrong with grief. There's nothing wrong with people who are grieving. They are not broken. We're not looking to see what is wrong with you. We are looking at what happened to you, right? And how can I strengthen the conditions around you that give you support? And that's why I'm such a huge fan of the five protective factors. So let's focus on that, right? Let's focus on strengthening the conditions that help these families cope. So on your screen right now, you see the five protective factors, right? And five protective factors really act as stabilizers during stress, right? We have parental resilience, also known as caregiver capacity, connection and belonging, those social connections, right? Access to basic needs, understanding child behavior, right? Do these caregivers understand the developmental needs of children? Do they understand, the social emotional competence of children, right? And then emotional regulation. Do they know how to regulate, right? Do they know, I always say, oh, you have to lend your calm, you have to lend your calm. And I have to stop and think, well, wait, does this adult know how to calm themselves down, right? Because if you can't calm yourself down, you can't lend anything, right? You're just going to lend more chaos and things are just going to escalate from there, right? So when these five protective factors are strong, families can maintain stability even during a loss, right? So we're going to explore each factor. We're going to talk about some practical strategies that you can use to strengthen them. So we're going to start with caregiver capacity. So grieving caregivers really experience a lot of emotional overload, right? They have that fatigue, they have that cognitive strain, right? Because stress really reduces our executive functioning and it really reduces our regulation. So parental resilience really refers to a caregiver's ability to cope with stress, their ability to regulate their emotions, and continue supporting their child during these difficult experiences, right? So, like I said in the beginning, when grief enters a family, caregiver capacity is often out the window, I say, right? It's significantly reduced, right? Grieving caregivers a lot of times experience that emotional overload, right? And it's not just sadness, but that irritability, right? That exhaustion, that numbness, that anxiety, that difficulty concentrating, right? I hear a lot of people describe this feeling as being in like this mental fog or overwhelmed by very simple decisions and simple choices. So when people who think they're helping, they come to you and say, okay, what can I do? It's like, oh my God, I can't even think of what I can tell you. I can't even wrap my mind around making another decision right now, right? So, when we're talking about from a stress and trauma perspective, grief really activates our body's survival response, right? We go into that survival mode. The nervous system shifts into protection mode, which can really make it hard for us to think clearly, for us to regulate our emotions, for us to organize, all of that stuff starts to decrease. And the way I like to think about it, it's because I'm so technical savvy, is, when you're on your computer or you're on your Mac and you have all these, tabs open and you're rolling with the punches, right? You have your PowerPoint up, you have your speaker notes up, and all of a sudden you see that little thing that just starts spinning, that little cursor, right? That's what it feels like for some caregivers. It's like, I can't do this. I need a reboot. I need you to turn it off. I need you to wait 10 seconds. I need to be unplugged, right? So that's what I mean by the from looking at it from a stress and trauma perspective, right? This is not a lack of care or effort from the caregiver. It's a human stress response, right? At the same time, caregivers feel this intense pressure to remain strong for their children, right? Or they believe that they have to hide their own grief, or I have to maintain these routines perfectly. I have to do it even better than when my person died, right? Hold it all together, even when their internal resources are completely depleted, right? This internal pressure really increases that guilt, that self-criticism, and that emotional strain, right? And in practice, this might look like, difficulty responding calmly to a child's behavior, right? A child might do something that in the past really didn't upset you as much, but now they do it and you snapped and you're yelling and you're like, why did you do that? What is wrong with you? Right? They might have inconsistency with routines. They might miss appointments. They might miss, school communication. They might emotionally withdraw. They have that heightened reactivity, right? In school, it might look like, a caregiver who used to respond quickly to your emails, is suddenly completely disengaged. There's no email, or the email, worse, the email's bouncing back, right? They probably closed that email account. In the community, it might be, a parent who stops attending programs, or appears distant in meetings, or you're telling them, okay, you have to go to this place at 3 o'clock, and you're just a blank slate, like it's not going through, right? So a trauma-informed approach really helps us interpret these behaviors as signs of a reduced capacity rather than a lack of commitment. Again, it's not what is wrong with you, it's what happened to you and how can I help, right? So when we understand that they're functioning through this lens, right, our roles shift from expecting performance to supporting regulation, right? Because caregivers' capacity directly affects a child's sense of safety, a child's sense of stability. So strengthening that resilience is one of the most important interventions that we can offer. So if parental resilience is reduced during grief, our role is always to help them restore that capacity, right? And when I say restore that capacity, I mean restore it in simple and practical ways, right? So we do this primarily through three approaches. The first one is normalizing their own grief, right? Supporting their co-regulation and helping rebuild that rest and routine. So when I say normalizing caregiver grief, so a lot of caregivers feel that they have to hide their emotions to protect their kids, right? They believe that if I show sadness, if I show this distress, then I'm failing as a parent. And we know that that is absolutely not true, right? When we normalize grief, we communicate that their reactions are understandable, what they're feeling is understandable in response to a loss, right? And it's nowhere near a sign of weakness or inadequacy, right? And that really helps reduce that shame. It really helps reduce that guilt, that self-criticism that really starts to consume your emotional energy, right? So normalizing grief can sound something really simple, like what you're feeling makes sense. Something very simple like that. Or you know what? You're doing the best that you can in a very difficult situation. And I need us to take a breath together because I think you're doing a good job. I think what you're doing is hard. Like letting them know, hey, everything that you're going through is normal. It's normal to feel what you're feeling, right? Because when they feel understood, their nervous system starts to settle. I always think about this image like glitter, right? Grief is like that. Like everything gets shaken up and everywhere you look, even months, years out, you're always going to find that glitter, right? Because it just never gets cleaned up. You never get all of it. So when caregivers start to feel understood, then their nervous system starts to settle, right? They start to regain that capacity, right? And that validation really increases their regulation. And again, some examples. So at school, a school counselor checking in with a caregiver, acknowledging how difficult their situation must be, rather than immediately focusing on, attendance, like, hey, your child's been out 13 days. Okay, well, their person just died, right? Like checking in and letting the caregiver know, I'm not calling about the attendance. I'm not calling about the behavior concern. I'm calling to see how you're doing, right? A community example, right? Maybe a program staff can acknowledge the familial stress before discussing the services, before discussing the expectations, right? The second thing that we want to do is support that co-regulation, right? Co-regulation means that one regulated nervous system helps calm another, right? It means that you have to be calm and regulated first before you can step in and lend that calm to someone else, right? Humans, we regulate through connection. And caregivers who are grieving often have very limited internal resources. So supportive interactions with professionals can really help them regain that emotional balance, right? And that might include listening without rushing them, right? They're talking and you're looking at your watch, you're not giving them that co-regulation. They think that they're just on this conveyor belt, right? So listening without rushing them, speaking slowly and calmly, what I'm hearing is that correct? Right? Checking in and making sure that what you're hearing and what you're picking up is what they're putting down, right? offering them reassurances and creating moments of safety in that conversation. Like, I'm so glad that you trusted me with that. Thank you. Thank you for trusting me. It really goes a long way, I promise you. Um, in practice, that might look like, a brief supportive check-in, maybe during drop-off or during pickup. Hey, you're good? Just want to check on you. It doesn't have to be a long conversation. They don't have to feel like they're in trouble, right? Um, taking time to listen before problem solving, they're telling you something and you're like, all right, I know they have to do this, 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 and this. While you're in your head, you stop listening to what they were saying to you. So take that time to listen, before problem solving. Offering your presence rather than solutions. I saw a lot of that in the chat this morning, which made me really happy. Again, we are not fixing the situation. We are helping to restore regulation, right? And third, we want to support rest and predictable routines. We know that grief disrupts daily structure and energy levels, but it also really disrupts our sleep. So when those routines collapse, that stress increases and just functioning becomes very difficult. So predictable routines really create a sense of safety, a sense of stability, not just for the caregiver, but for the children as well, right? I'm always reminded of a quote that Gina always says to us, and that's that there has to be someone home to receive a guest. So prioritizing rest helps to build that routine. It helps you get back to being you, right? And it's okay for you to rest. Rest is a part of healing. There's nothing wrong with that. You're not lazy. You need that. Your body is calling for that. And we really need to listen to that, right? Because we are of no use to anyone if we're completely have fallen apart, right? We need to make sure that there's someone home to receive a guest. Thank you, Gina, for that. And how can we support all of this? So we support this by encouraging very small, manageable routines. If you are a facilitator at Good Grief or you've taken our facilitator training, you know that at Good Grief, we refer to this as having a tiny tweak, right? We're not going to fix every single day. I mean, every single day. We're not going to fix every single thing in one moment, but we can start off with something really, really small, right? Like today, I'm going to put my phone on Do Not Disturb at 7:30 and I'm just going to lay down, or I'm going to read my book, or I'm just going to take a mindful minute for myself, right? Some examples that you can offer them could be, like I just said, a consistent bedtime, a predictable school communication, right? Maybe you could tell the counselor or the teacher, hey, I'm going to try to respond to one email this week that you send me. Just one, and that's okay, right? Maybe regular check-in times with support staff, like the agency that you're working with. Hey, if you can check in with me the first Tuesday of the month, right? Let's do that. Let's start small, right? Remember, the goal is not perfection. The goal is stability, right? So rest is essential as grieving caregivers. They often feel like they have to keep going without pause. So encouraging them to rest and letting them know, hey, this rest is really going to restore your emotional and your cognitive capacity. I also want to just pause really quickly and let you know that it's really important for us to be mindful the role that culture plays here too, right? I know it's not on my screen, but it's something I always like to sprinkle in, right? Some families find healing through collective spaces, right? Like, churches or faith communities, cultural organizations, extended family networks. For a lot of cultures, grief is processed within the community rather than individually. So supporting those connections might mean, you recognizing who the spiritual leaders are in your community and going to them for support, right? Or acknowledging, this collective mourning practices that they're doing, right? Encouraging participation in those cultural rituals or remembrance traditions, right? That's really important because, someone who grieves, they grieve entirely, not only with their whole body, but with the experiences that they've had, with the cultures that they were raised with the beliefs and the values. So please be mindful that culture plays a really huge part in this as well. So a trauma-informed and culturally responsive approach will really respect that healing happens in community, however that community might look, right? At the center of all this is a very simple and very powerful message, right? That caregivers do not need to be fully okay or normal, whatever that looks like for folks, in order for them to support their children, right? Presence, connection, small moments of stability are more than enough, right? And when caregivers begin to feel supported and regulated, then they're better able to connect with others, which leads us to our next protective factor, and hopefully it'll go, which is social connections, right? So social connections really means the presence of supportive relationships that provide emotional support, that provide belonging, and that offer some practical help, right? Families experience loss frequently withdraw from others, and this can happen for a lot of different reasons. It could be, emotional exhaustion. It could be the fear of being misunderstood, or it could even be the discomfort of other people who just don't know what to say, who don't know who don't know what to say or don't know how to act, and so they themselves withdraw. So it's very normal for families who are going through grief to experience some frequent withdrawal from other people who they thought might have been there, right? A lot of families experience stigma, especially if the loss involved, a death by suicide, violence, incarceration, or even substance abuse related deaths. So there's a lot of stigma that comes around that. Caregivers and children may also feel different from everybody else, right? So this sense of difference can lead to, being isolated, even if there's support available, right? Isolation increases stress. We all know that. Our human nervous systems, again, they regulate through what? Through connection, right? So when connection decreases, that stress goes up. So that means that social support isn't just helpful, it's protective, right? So in practice, we might see families who might not go to any more community programs, right? You might see a student who previously engaged in sports or was super social, and then now they're eating alone or they're avoiding the activities that they once liked, right? Or you might have a parent who just is completely distant, isn't returning your calls, isn't talking anymore, right? Our role is really to help rebuild that supportive, safe connection at a pace that respects a family's capacity, right? So if grief can lead to isolation, then our work is to intentionally rebuild connections, right? So let's look at how we can strengthen that in practice, right? We strengthen social connections by intentionally creating opportunities for families to feel safe and supportive, right? And there are three key approaches to this, right? We're going to look at creating those peer spaces, identifying those trusted adults, and really providing those warm handoffs of support when possible, right? I know I always say there's the ideal and then there's real. Sometimes there's not a time where you can have that warm handoff, but when you can, that's what's most important. So let's look at peer spaces first, right? We create consistent peer spaces where families and children experience that belonging, right? That's why places like Good Grief exist, right? Because we understand the need for spaces where children can feel free to be themselves, right? Where they can feel their feelings, where they can find support among their peers, and those peers really know what it's like to be a grieving kid because they're one too, right? So spaces at Good Grief are really intentionally designed to invite those dialogues, to create those moments where they can say what they feel. How are they feeling now that their person has died? And really promote those connections with others who share those similar experiences, right? And that really reduces isolation and normalizes grief responses, because when they're with their people, right, they can say like, oh, this really sucked. Versus if they were in a school and said, oh, this really sucked. And people are like, oh my goodness, how could you say that? That was your father, or that was your aunt, or that was your uncle, right? At Good Grief, we don't assume those relationships. We don't assume that it was good. We don't assume that it was bad. We don't assume anything. We allow the kids to come in, to feel what they're feeling, say what they're feeling. And as facilitators, we help them process that, right? So that's why those spaces are so incredibly important. Second, we want to help ensure that children and caregivers have access to trusted and consistent adults. So predictable relationships, right? Because that increases safety. That's why, again, if you're a facilitator at Good Grief or you've taken our training, you know how important it is to keep that predictable schedule, right? We start at this time. There's going to be a knock at the door to tell you there's 10, 15 minutes left. And then we end at this time, right? Because so much has been shaken up in these children and their families' lives that they can rest assured that when they come to Good Grief, this is how the schedule goes, this is what's going to happen, and that increases their sense of safety, right? Even one stable relationship can significantly buffer the effects of stress. So just one. So a trusted adult could be a teacher, a facilitator, right? Any school staff, um, extended family members. Again, that cultural lens, right? Faith leaders. Who is it in the community that they trust and build the safety from there, right? The key is to be consistent, to have that presence, and to have that emotional safety, right? At school, it could be a student can have a check-in person at the school, right? A gym teacher. You have no idea how much these kids tell their health and PE teachers, right? It could be, your homeroom teacher, anybody, right? Anybody that the child feels comfortable speaking to this person, checking in with this person, that one relationship. For culturally diverse families, right, trusted relationships may exist outside of formal systems, right? So families may rely on extended kinship networks, or like I said earlier, community elders, spiritual guides. We want to make sure that you're respecting and that you're recognizing these relationships and knowing that they are relationships that strengthen engagement and strengthen trust. Third, we use warm handoffs, right? When we're connecting families to support. So a warm handoff might mean, personally connecting someone to a resource rather than giving them information, right? Because that really reduces barriers and it really increases that follow through, right? So warm handoffs might be, helping them to schedule an appointment when possible, walking them through the service, right? Reading them, if there's paperwork or a survey that your agency does, making sure that it is in a language that is not overwhelming to them, making sure that you're sitting with them and saying, okay, do you understand these things that are in front of you, right? Do you feel comfortable answering these questions? Something very simple like that. Excuse me. Providing support during the first connection. I'm really proud of how Good Grief and our program department does this because they check in, especially during our nights of support. You have time with your co-facilitator beforehand. You have time with the entire group of facilitators before you even go in to see your group, right? You have time afterwards to talk to your facilitator, right? So there's many opportunities where Good Grief has those fit into our schedule where if there needs to be a warm handoff, then there's plenty of people that can do that, right? Again, providing language access, using culturally matched providers when possible, right? Involving trusted community representatives in this process, right? Those warm handoffs, they communicate, hey, listen, you're not alone in this, and I see you, right? I see you, and I'm going to help you where you are and help you out with the things that you need right now. So connection restores regulation, it reduces isolation, and it really strengthens that resilience, right? Connection really helps families feel supported. But healing is really difficult when their basic needs are not met, right? And that leads us to our next protective factor, which is concrete supports. And when I talk about concrete supports, I mean access to resources that really help families meet their basic needs, right? Um, when families are experiencing a loss, practical challenges often increase. So grief can disrupt employment. It can disrupt their housing stability, childcare, transportation, in addition to those daily routines, right? So financial strain and logistical overwhelm can quickly consume all of our emotional and cognitive energy, right? I often think about my my undergrad work when I was a preschool teacher, before I became a preschool teacher, right? When your basic needs aren't met, then the nervous system prioritizes survival. So I go back to my undergrad, you have to Maslow before you can bloom, right? You have to have those basic needs met before you can do anything else, right? A hungry child can't think, a stressed out adult who doesn't know where rent is coming from can't support a child, right? So those basic needs really need to be met. And that makes emotional regulation, it makes learning and healing that much more difficult because before they can even think about processing their grief, they have to really feel safe and stable first, right? So, at school, that might be, a caregiver who's unable to attend conferences, right? Because, they maybe don't have a car anymore. Or now, if they miss one more day of work, they could lose their job, right? So there's so much going on there, that we want to make sure that we're looking at these things when we're thinking about how we're going to give them those concrete supports, right? When basic needs become overwhelming, providing practical support becomes very powerful, and it becomes a very powerful form of care. So let's look at how we can strengthen concrete supports. Again, a trauma-informed approach recognizes that these challenges are barriers and not resistance, right? They're not coming to the meeting because, they want to get fired, or they're not coming to the school meeting because they don't care how their child is acting, right? It's a barrier. It's hard for them. They're not resistant. It's a barrier for them. And our role is to help reduce that barrier. So when we strengthen concrete supports, we are increasing access. We are removing those barriers or reducing those barriers, right? And we are responding to families' real needs, right? First, what we do is we provide accessible resources, right? Accessible and understandable resources, right? We want to make sure that what we're giving them is in a language that they can understand. It is in a language that they can process, right? Families navigating grief often experience cognitive overload, and that makes already complex systems even harder to navigate, right? So think about that, right? We want to give them clear information, simplified processes and procedures, simplified language, step-by-step guidance if we can. All of these things help to reduce their stress. That might be something simple as a simplified resource list, right? Maybe you have 4 pages of resources list, and you see that this family is really struggling, so you give them 10, right? You don't give them 4 pages, you give them just the first 10, the first 5, right? By sitting with them, by talking with them and letting them know, okay, where is it that you need the most help, right? Is it here? Is it here? And then giving them the simplified resource list, right? Flexible communication options, hey, you don't have to call me every Thursday at 3 o'clock. How about you email me? How about you text me, right? Giving them different ways that they're able to communicate with you. And then a clear explanation of what's available for them, right? Letting them know, like, if you do this, then this might happen, right? You wanna ask them, are you someone who thinks peer support is right for you, or would you rather individualized therapy, right? Sitting with them and letting them know what these things are, what is out there for them. Second, we want to ask families directly, what support do they need from these agencies, right? Rather than assuming what's helpful, we want to center that familial voice and that choice, right? Because that is what promotes that dignity, that empowerment, and that trust, right? So some questions might be, what would make things easier for you right now? And maybe that is, I need a bus ticket. Okay, so let me see who I can talk to that gives bus tickets. Let me connect all these agencies together, right? What barriers are you facing? Maybe it's a language barrier, maybe it's rent. How can I help? What can I do for you, especially if you're working within these agencies? Third, we want to ensure that supports, again, are culturally responsive, right? Families' experiences with institutions, with language access, cultural expectations, they really shape how we seek and receive help, right? Some families may rely on, extended family networks, community-based supports, rather than formal services, right? This makes me think about, when I was a kid, and, my sister and I had to translate for my mom. And I think my sister was like 9 when we were helping my mom open a bank account, right? Those are the experiences that we have with institutions. So we don't know, can we trust this person, right? So recognizing that and understanding, like, okay, maybe I need to invite another person into this conversation so that we can all help this family, right? When we're talking about being culturally responsive, that might include providing language access or having an interpreter come in, right? Recognizing cultural approaches to caregiving and decision making rather than judging them, right? Partnering with community organizations, respecting those familial values, right? Understanding immigration, understanding systemic stressors, because all of this affects access, right? A lot of us are scared. We're terrified to go outside and figure out the system. We want to make that easier for them, right? So for families, accepting help requires trust, right? So building that trust is all part of providing support. When caregivers feel supported, when their basic needs are met, then they have more capacity to understand and to respond to their child's behavior, which brings us to knowledge of parenting and development, right? This is our fourth protective factor. And that's knowledge of parenting and child development, which means that you understand how children respond to stress and respond to grief across different stages of development, right? Children express grief very differently from adults. Their understanding of death changes with age, right? And their behavior often reflects what their developmental capacity is rather than what the intentional behavior is, right? Um, David Kessler uses the term puddle jumpers, and I absolutely love that because it means that kids can go in and out of expressing their grief rather quickly. And it's very normal for them to do so, right? One minute they're playing at the sand table, the next minute they're talking to you about, how their dad died in a crash, and then the next minute they're back at the sand table, right? If you don't understand how this works and how child development works, you might misinterpret that as misbehavior, or you might misinterpret that as what is going on here? They don't care. And that's not the truth, right? And that can increase a lot of conflict and a lot of stress within the family. I always say that all behavior is communication, and a child's action and behavior is just an expression of a feeling that they might not know how to express or explain with words, right? So you might see, regression, you might see difficulty concentrating, for the older kids, you might see some risk-taking behaviors, right? Just making sure that you understand and that you know that all behavior is communication, right? So when caregivers understand these responses, then they can support their children, with the right tools and with the right guidance, right? Let's look at how we can strengthen that. So we can strengthen caregiver knowledge by helping them understand their child's behavior and giving them those practical tools to respond, right? And what do we do that? Again, we're going to normalize. We're going to normalize those age-related grief responses. When caregivers understand that behaviors are developmentally expected, then their stress decreases and their responses become more supportive, right? We want them to understand, hey, regression is very common. Emotional changes are expected, and children revisit grief as they develop, right? A child at 5 is not going to look at grief the same way as a child who's 10, right? And that's normal. And we want to be able to help caregivers understand that language, right? We want to provide them with simple language tools. We want to offer them, maybe simple scripts, maybe guidance that caregivers can use, right? Again, hey, I'm here for you. You're safe. And one of my ultimate favorite is, I don't even know what to say right now, but I'm so glad you told me, and we're going to get through this together, right? Be honest. Let them know. Clear language really increases that emotional safety. It strengthens that attachment, right? I'm a big fan of having those conversations in the car, and I joke around because I say, this is great because they can't escape, right? But it's a great way to have those conversations, right? You're paying attention to the road, your child is in the back seat. The number of conversations that come out of that are beautiful, are wonderful. Again, at Good Grief, they encourage us a lot after the nights of support. Hey, this is what we talked about in the kids group. Maybe you want to talk about it in the car, right? And it shows the children like, wow, my facilitator, really does care what's going on with me. And look, I'm having this conversation with my mom, with my dad, with my caregiver, right? Or you can offer them, different alternatives that help them to initiate those conversations, right? There's one activity, it's called Pillow Talk, right? And it's where you both have a notebook. And if your child is feeling sad, lost, angry, whatever feeling they're feeling, or is just missing their person, or has questions about their person, right? They can write that down in the notebook, put it under the caregiver's pillow, and then the caregiver can then read it and respond in that same notebook and put it under the child's pillow, right? And this is a really low stakes way to open communication in a way that is not scary for either one of you, right? It's not as scary as bringing it to you face to face, right? And you're both thinking, oh my goodness, I'm going to upset them if I cry. And the child is thinking, oh my God, I'm going to make my caregiver cry if I ask this question, right? It's so much easier if you offer it in a different way, right? When children feel understood, when they feel supported, they really begin to develop those emotional skills that they need that helps them cope and helps them build that resiliency, right? Which leads us to our final protective factor, which is social emotional competence. This is our fifth protective factor. And this just means the ability to identify, to express, and regulate emotion, right? Grief creates very intense emotional experiences that can really overwhelm a child's coping skills, right? And a lot of children, they might lack the language or the tools to describe exactly what it is that they're feeling. And so they'll express their distress or their anger through behavior rather than through words, right? So you might see, those emotional outbursts, withdrawing, difficulty calming after stress, right? So developing emotional skills really helps children to process grief and really regain that sense of control that they don't feel that they have anymore, right? So let's explore how we can help strengthen and develop those skills, right? We strengthen social and emotional competence by helping children recognize, right, and express emotions in a safe way, right? So feeling language, right? We want to build that emotional vocabulary. We want to help children name emotions, right? Because naming emotion reduces their overwhelm and increases that regulation, right? So tools like feeling charts or emotion words, right? They really help children express what it is that they are experiencing, right? Instead of hey, how you feeling? Maybe they don't want to talk to you, right? Maybe you show them, hey, you want to point to the face that shows what you're feeling right now, or you want to write on this piece of paper, or you want to draw on this piece of paper what you're feeling right now, right? Second, we want to help children recognize their body's signals, right? Grief shows up physically. We know that. And if you've ever been to a good grief workshop or a professional development, you know that we discuss this at length, right? That grief shows up physically as well as emotionally. So physically, you might be fatigued. You might feel that tightness in your chest. Your stomach might hurt. Your head hurts, right? So helping children notice these signals builds that self-awareness and in turn, again, helps them with that regulation, right? And then modeling expression. We want the adults around the children to model healthy emotional expression, right? When adults demonstrate calm responses, when adults validate those feelings, and then when they show appropriate emotional expressions, then children learn, hey, my emotions and my feelings are manageable too, right? Mr. Rogers always says anything that's mentionable is manageable, right? So we want to make sure that adults and kids know, hey, I can mention this, and when I mention it, I can have people that help me manage it, and this is how I manage it, right? So emotional skills really help children move through grief with greater confidence and with greater stability. Excuse me. So I'm getting ready to land this plane, and before we go, I just want to move a minute from the lecturing and the learning into application, right? So this moment is all about reflection, not adding more to your workload, but noticing what is already working, right? And identifying one small next step, right? Again, a trauma-informed approach focuses on strengths first. I think you've heard me say that many, many times this afternoon. I'm just going to say it again, right? A trauma-informed approach focuses on strength first. So we begin by recognizing, the existing capacity before we even try to introduce change, right? So just take 4 or 5 seconds to yourself, take a quiet moment, and reflect on your own practice, your role, your setting, the families that you serve, right? And I invite you to consider these 3 questions, right? The first one is already on your screen, and that's, what already works, right? What practices, what relationships or approaches are already supporting families that are experiencing griefs, right? Where do you see connection? Where do you see, stability happening? Where do you see compassion happening? And you can either jot it down for yourself, you can jot it down in the chat, whatever works for you. But just think about that for a moment. What already works? The second thing I want you to ponder is, what is one action that I could start doing tomorrow, right? What's something that I could try tomorrow? And I want you to think, again, tiny tweaks. I want you to think small. I want you to think realistically, right? Something that is doable within your current role. It might be a brief caregiver check-in. It might be, all right, you know what? I have to provide clearer information here, right? It might be, hey, I could probably sit down with this client and create a more predictable routine for them. Maybe it's strengthening a connection with the family, right? Maybe you lost touch and you didn't think twice about it until today. Maybe that's something that you can do. So just think about that for a minute.
Warm handoffs stands out, Annette,
Oh,
in the
yes.
chat. Warm handoffs, so important.
Yes, yes, yeah. And the third thing that I want you to do is, which protective factor feels, you know, most important to strengthening, feels most important to strengthen in your setting right now, right? Is it caregiver resilience? Is it access to resources? Caregiver understanding, emotional skill building. That's one that I always like to revisit. Is it social connection? Is it access to resources, resilience? Which protective factor feels most important for you to strengthen right now? Which do you think you need to focus on? And again, the goal is not perfection, right? It is intentional practice. Small, consistent actions really create meaningful impact over time, right? I always think about, and I can't remember where I saw it, but it's like the river that's flowing through rocks, and eventually that rock starts to get like that indentation in it, right? What can we do? What small, consistent actions can we create um, that will help and build that ripple effect over time? And before I ask you to fill out a feedback form, because I am going to ask you to fill out a feedback form, I want you to find a comfortable position to sit in, right? Make sure wherever you're sitting, you are comfortable, because that's what's most important, that you are safe, and that you feel okay with what I'm going to ask you to do, right? I'm going to ask you to take 3 deep breaths with me. And when you do that, I ask that you put your hand over your heart, because I feel like everything that we do in this work is a work of heart. And I want us to remember that, right? Because sometimes we get so caught up in our systems and we get so caught up in checking those boxes that we forget why we started doing this. And we started doing this is because we have the heart for it, right? I'm going to ask you to take 3 deep breaths with me. The first breath is for your gentleness. Okay. So, first breath, in deep through your nose and hold it there, and out through your mouth. Thank you. The next breath I'm going to ask you to take is a deep breath for yourself. Okay. Again, deep breath in through your nose and out through your mouth. Now, remember, I can't see or hear you. So if in that, when you're letting it out through your mouth, if you want to let out a, oh, perfectly okay for you to do so. Do what feels comfortable for you. And then the last the last deep breath I want you to take is for those who you support. So one last time, in deep through your nose, and out through your mouth. I want to thank you all so very much for your commitment to supporting families, for your commitment to these webinars, for your commitment to Good Grief, and most importantly, for your commitment to yourself. I'm going to stop sharing really quickly in case there are any questions, any comments, and I am going to put, I hope, my,
I put your email in the chat.
thank you. I also want to put, this is a Google form. And through this Google form, I'm able to know what it is that you all would like to see moving forward from our webinars. What is most helpful for you? Thank you, thank you, thank you all so much for being with me, for staying with me in this hour. I know a lot of you have tons of work to do, and just carving out that little time for yourself and helping you help others. is really, really important. Yes, Amanda, there is a certificate of attendance. Everything will come out in the next couple of weeks, and you'll get a copy of the recording. I will also include a copy of the slides and any other resources that you may want or need. But I want to thank you again. Thank you so much. Don't forget to take some time for yourself today. Don't forget to check in with folks. Remember, we all thrive on connection. So connect with somebody today. Let them know that you're there for them. Let them know, hey, I don't know what to say, but Annette said I'm here for you.
Annette, we have a question. Do you have a resource for emotional skill building?
Yes, I do. Is there if they can just drop the email and then I can copy it and I will send them right away.
So Juliana, if you just tell us your email,
Yeah, if you
I
could
will.
just drop your email in there. I have tons of resources with regards to emotional regulation. I think there's like two or three websites that off the top of my head I can't remember right at this moment that have like downloads and feelings charts and all of those things. So yes,
We
absolutely.
have are the grief support groups in New Jersey in person? Oh, where are we? Let's come back. In person, or can children, teens attend if they live out of state if there are online offerings for grief support groups? Okay, the only group we our groups are all in person now except for one, and we have a virtual group, I believe, for young adults, ages 18 to 30-ish. Who may have moved out of New Jersey because of college or life or whatever. So that is the only group we have virtually now, but we do have great referrals to other online group platforms, like actively moving forward through is a wonderful one for adolescents and young adults actively moving forward. Um, and there are many that are also very specific. Like you can find a lot. Being a social worker, I'm the queen of resources and connecting. So, like Return to Zero Hope has only online groups for people who have had pregnancy or infant loss, for example. Grasp is grief recovery after substance passing. So there's a lot of, seriously Googling sometimes and finding kind of local support groups. Always call first, though, because some of them are no longer running. And one of the hard things is if we refer grieving families to places where it's not there, it's like another loss for them. So I try to make sure they are still running.
Got a
Let's see.
question directed for the through the panelist link, and it said, "What about for kids with
Oh,
acting out behavior that's disruptive to the group?" So, for our nights of support, excuse me, we have, like I said, very consistent way that our groups are run. So we have a list of I don't like to call them rules,
agreements or
agreements,
promises.
right? So there's agreements, where we keep our hands to ourselves or we ask for permission to hug someone, things along those lines. Consistency is key, and going over that at the beginning of every session that you guys are together, reminding them throughout, right? If they're being disruptive, hey, why don't we go back and look at our rules? I think that, we might not be following our group agreements because not everyone here is feeling safe, right? The way that I used to do it as a preschool teacher, I used to always say to them, hey, safe, fair and safety is not everyone getting the same thing. Fair is everyone getting what they need to succeed, right? So what is it that is making this specific participant act out? What is it that they need in order to feel safe in the group that they're in? I again have tons of resources with how to help redirect behavior. I have tons of resources on really digging deep and finding out what is underneath that iceberg that is making this child do this. And I absolutely, again, I will send that.
We we also have one of our agreements is or guidelines, group rules, promises is take a break. And so if there is enough staff, and in the littler groups, we tend to have two co-facilitators and an intern maybe, they can take a walk if somebody says, I need to take a break. Maybe things are getting uncomfortable. We have the same rule for adults taking a break if they need to just step out and kind of re-regulate whatever it is.
Yeah, and you guys also have TCs, right? Where,
Yes,
if it's getting out of the hands of the facilitators, there's always a team coordinator, right? Is that what TC stands for?
team
A
coordinator.
team
Yep.
coordinator, who, you can shoot a text to. They are always on site. Again, our goal with our nights of support is that not only for the children and the participants to process their grief, but to do it in a safe way. So there's always staff, there's always a TC. The facilitators understand prior to coming to their group, they have already identified who the TCs are, how they can be contacted. No one in our center is ever alone with a child, right? There's a
Mm-mm.
plethora of adults around. But yeah, thank you, Gina. I appreciate that.
Rebecca is asking, are you guys providing training for individuals wanting to certify in grief counseling?
To my knowledge, we do not.
Mhm.
But I can absolutely ask the right people and see if that's something that we're willing to bring on. But no, not at this
And
moment.
then we have another question from Paul. Is there another full grief training coming outside of lunch PDs?
So, Paul, we do have tons of workshops and PDs that we offer for a fee. Again, if you drop your email into the chat, I'll make sure that I grab it and I can actually send you a list of all of our wonderful, wonderful professional developments, along with a description of what they are, as well as cost.
Also, we do have facilitator trainings for people who are interested in becoming facilitators at Good Grief, or maybe you just want to take it for your own benefit of groups. That is a 3-day training, 3 full days, not in a row anymore. And it is so deep and so wonderful. So that's another thing. And we also encourage any of you who do live in the New Jersey, Pennsylvania area to come by for a tour or sign up for our training. Let's
Yeah,
see. Can you advise on where we can find additional trainings? We can send
yeah, I
that
can.
out.
I will send that out. Once I once we get off of this webinar, I can send you all of the list of the trainings that we have. I think um the
Okay,
facility
now I
is also a very, I will say for me personally, very cathartic experience. It's wonderful.
best.
I suggest everybody take it, even if you don't want to become a facilitator, because we do focus on you, right? It's yes, you're supporting the participants and the families that come to our centers, but during those 3 days of training, you are also focusing on yourself and your skill set and different ways that you're able to support people in your personal life. So I 100% recommend that. I
And
want to
your
be
own
mindful of
and your
everyone.
own
Good. I'm sorry.
and your own grief history, because we do know one thing I used to say when I worked in palliative care was that we all carry a long history and we've inherited practices, and it's never too late to look at your grief and how it affects you, because if we're going to be supporting grieving people, whether it's over a death or whether it's illness, whether it's whatever it is, it's really important to look at our own stuff that we bring. Sorry, Annette, I didn't mean to cut you off. Cut you
Yes,
off.
if you did register for this training, when you get your certificate of attendance, that will, excuse me, when you get your certificate of attendance, there will be not only the recording of the slides, but also the resources um, that I mentioned and resources that will be helpful. So I want to be mindful of everyone's time. It is now 1 p.m. Again, thank you all so much for being with me. Thank you, Gina, for all of your help. And thank you all for everything that you do for families, for children, and again, for yourself. So please take some time today to, my grandmother used to say, to stop and smell the roses. If you don't
Hmm.
have allergy, please take some time to stop and smell the roses. If you do have allergies, please don't smell the roses, because then you probably won't be able to smell anything else for a couple of days. And I don't want that on my conscience. All right. Thank you all so much. I will absolutely follow up. Please make sure that you fill out the Microsoft form that I dropped into the chat. And have you all.
And we have another one coming up next. You have the list of.
Yes, I'm sorry, we have another webinar coming up in March where it would be Gina. She's going to be talking about how to care for yourself as a caregiver. We're really, really big on Good Grief on making sure that our caregivers are not forgotten and that they're taken care of. And Gina does a wonderful, wonderful job of not only reminding us, but giving us some practical strategies on how we can do that. Thank you all so much. And I know that Gina gave you all my email. You can absolutely shoot me an email. It is the best way to get in contact with me. And I promise you that I do respond. I do see them. And if I can't get you the answer, I will absolutely connect you to someone who can. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a good one. Thank you, Gina.
Thanks, everyone.